Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel.
Jeff Berkowitz with Public Affairs, Chicago Bureau Chief, Illinois Channel. We're going to do a great show today because we're going to be talking about all the topics that are of interest to people across the state of Illinois.
Jeff, people are not, I think, quite yet focused on the campaign for governor that's going to be coming up in 2022. But Governor Pritzker announced that he will be running for re-election. He announced that this week. And so we're going to be focusing, as you just said, on some of the key issues that certainly, I don't know if the campaigns will bring them up, but we're going to bring them up today. So let's start, Jeff, with education. And I know you have some points you wanted to make.
Yeah, let's just give people something to look at. Let's go to slide number 2 to start with. I think we have, is that slide? Got my numbers out of order here. Here we go. Slide number 2. What you're seeing, folks, it's a pictorial, a visual of 50 states across the country. All of those lines represent a state. If you can't read that, that's a state. On the left side, we have the high spending states on education. And on the right side, over on the far right, we have the lower spending states. Where is Illinois? They're about 10th or so from the top. They're spending 16,
well, let's just say it's the red line is Illinois with per pupil spending of $16,227. And that gray line that's in the middle of all the gray lines to the right of the red line is the national average at $13,187. So Illinois is spending approximately $3,000 more per pupil per year.
And worse, relative to one of our neighbors, Indiana, that first blue line, Indiana is spending $10,397. So Illinois is spending about $6,000 more per kid per year than Indiana. What about Florida? Another one of our competitors, even though more distant, that far blue line over on the right side, Florida is spending $9,646, 45, whatever, per kid per year. And if you want to see that again, let's go to slide 3, which shows the same thing, but now strips away these other states. Just looking at Illinois on the far left at 16,000, Indiana over there on the right at 10,000 or so, and Florida down to less than 10,000. So, that's not good. The governor say, "Oh, it is great." Okay. And many Democrats say, "Oh, it's great. We're spending so much more." No, if you're spending more, it's only possibly good if you're getting more. Are we getting more? Let's take a look at slide. But let's sort through those lines. These are test scores for the average test scores across the state, different years, different times from 2007 to 2019. And Illinois is on the bottom. That's not good. On the bottom in this case is not spending, it's on the bottom of performance. These are scores for 4th grade math, National Assessment of Educational Performance used across the country, NAEP. You may say, "Oh, that's just math." But look, this comes from WirePoints. You go to WirePoints, they got the scores there for reading, they have them for science, for writing. They tend to be very similar. That is, Illinois is on the bottom, even though spending much more. Indiana, not the bottom, but on the bottom of these 4 states. So they're performing less well than Indiana on average, and performing less well than Florida and the national more. That's not good. That's not good. So you got to ask the people who are running the show. Governor Pritzker, he's the guy who appoints the people to the Illinois State Board of Education, ISBE. They're sort of in charge. Are we getting our money's worth? You got to ask the people running for.
Well, the point is this. The point is this. When we have the campaign for governor in 2022, education spending could be a very key issue that is going to be coming up. And why is it, not just what we're spending, but why is it that we are having so much more money being spent in Illinois, and yet we are getting fewer results as we see consistently here? And that's an issue. And then the other point is, Jeff, as people are complaining across the board about the cost of their property taxes, here we go with WirePoint slide, and we see that, hey, on the top line, Illinois spending $16,270, as you just pointed out. Florida is spending $9,645. That's a difference of $6,582 a year per pupil. And Jeff, you're saying that this is the key right here, these numbers, to how we actually end up having a property tax cut.
Right. The bottom line, a 40% property tax cut if Illinois were to match Florida's per student spending. How do we know that? Let's do a little bit of math. This is why it's important that our kids learn math and that folks, you've learned math over the years, hopefully in school when you were there. But let's start, as Terry said, with Illinois at $16,227 per kid per year. Florida, $9,645. This is that top line on the slide we're looking at. If you subtract one from the other, the 9,000, the Florida number from the Illinois number, you get the difference, $6,582. Illinois is spending per kid per year more than $6,500 than Florida is per kid per year. Well, what's the impact on your property taxes? Well, that's $6,582 per kid per year times the 2 million students we have across the state of Illinois gives us a number of $13 billion. That's $13 billion that are in your property taxes right now that doesn't have to be, because we could, as we've seen, we could be spending much less as Florida is. And if we do it the same way, we should be able to get a better performance. Not only the same, but better.
Now, let me ask you a question, Jeff.
Just go back to that slide just for a second, Terry, just about there. If you can just go back. 13 billion equals 40% of Illinois' 32 billion in annual property taxes. That's what WirePoints tells us at the bottom of that slide. So that's how we get from spending less to having a 40% cut in your property taxes. I mean,
okay, so here's my question.
That's a big deal.
Yeah,
that's a big deal.
What do you think the odds are that the powers that be, the political powers, the Democratic Party, are going to allow a cut in educational funding?
Well, not very likely, because as you know, Terry,
give it odds. What kind of odds would you give that the Democrats would go along with such a cut?
1,000 to 1, maybe 10,000 to 1.
Yeah, maybe 0.10% likely.
Yeah, you have a bet.
So on one hand, we're I mean, just to point this out so that I don't want the viewers to go, these people have lost their minds. No, we know it's not going to happen. But what we are trying to point out is, as we have pointed out, that when you look at the per pupil spending and where are the costs going and why are the property taxes so high and why are we not getting more returns, that's something that we could all be discussing. Why are we not getting better returns for a bigger bang for a buck? We might all agree, hey, we're willing to spend this money and have property taxes high if we were getting kids that were well educated across the board. We're not. We never have had that. And why is it that they can educate kids I was going to say presumably well in these other states? Not just presumably, the test scores say that the kids in Indiana and the kids in Florida are better educated. They're above the national average. Illinois, for all of the money we spend, we are below the national average, and that's why we have high property taxes. And I would like to at least have the issue come up, Jeff, as we have these people running for governor, to say, do you have any plans to do anything about the property taxes? I mean, we had Governor Rauner talking about it, and he, discussed it. Nothing happened. Now, I'm not blaming Governor Rauner. Isn't the king. He has, he couldn't get things done for the very reasons that I was just saying. What are the odds that the Democrats in power are going to cut educational spending to lower property taxes? Slim and none.
Right. The governor, we may get into detail, but the governor in the last few days, Terry, as our viewers know, announced for re-election. And he talked a little bit about pensions and a little bit about property taxes. And he touted as something we talked about earlier in the year, last year, that may have been the year before when he had legislation consolidating police and fire funds, pension funds across the state. And as I asked him in a press conference, and he said he conceded, yeah, it's like about 4% of our total pension shortfall problem, not very much relative to the $420 billion shortfall. But now he's touting and throwing around in the last day or two. He said, boy, that consolidation was great. It saved 10 to $20 billion in pensions over the, and you didn't say over what period, you said save 10 to $20 billion in pensions, and that's going to result in a nice, at least property taxes won't go up much, if at all. We can do that. We've got the savings. Well, his savings of 10 to $20 billion, we don't even know if it's real. He didn't document it. If he does get that, that's about, we're talking translated into a potential 2% cut in property tax.
Before we leave
2%.
education here, let me go to this slide that we presented and say there are other issues besides the dollars being spent. You've got the schools that were closed. That could be an issue where the voters hold the governor responsible. Some people think that he mishandled the COVID. A lot of people think he mishandled COVID. A lot of people support him. But the schools were closed over the last year. The teachers union,
not opening. Just excuse me, Chair, but that first line is important. That he chose closing the schools or giving the schools and the unions the opportunity to close over keeping the schools open for the last year. And then that second line says, essentially, as you said, they're not going to do this property tax cut, which they could do. This would be a cut in spending on teachers, and the teachers unions don't want that. So basically, the governor went along with the teachers unions over the students. And what else did he go along with? He's going along with monopoly schools over school choice.
Explain that.
He's doing what he can. The unions are trying to
explain the monopoly schools over school choice.
Well, folks, everybody knows that we have public schools and people get to go to the school, not of their choice, but in their neighborhood. Their zip code determines in large part where they go. And that's their only choice. So that school has a monopoly. And that school gets their funding from the state. We have some private schools trying to compete, but if you want to go to the private school, even though you continue to pay your property taxes, you got to pay an additional amount. You got to get a scholarship.
And under Governor Rauner, they had started, which is still there, a very small school choice kind of a plan where people could donate their money. It didn't come out of the state budget, and even that, Governor Pritzker was trying to close that down, as if the public schools were threatened by where we spend billions of, tens of billions of dollars on education, as if the public schools were going to be threatened by $100 million, life jacket that you could throw to some kid in a failing school.
5,000 or 6,000 students across the state, of which there are 2 million, were benefiting. This is a good program. I don't mean to minimize it, and it was good. But
the governor Pritzker tried to shut this down. Right. Even as small as it is.
Right. He wanted to cut the tax credit from 70% or so to 40%, or whatever it was, maybe 75%. And he didn't succeed. But why was he doing that? Because the unions were pressing him to snuff out this small bit of competition with them. So let's go back to that chart again, which we called education. Closing schools over opening schools, teachers unions over students, monopoly schools over school choice, which would infuse some competition, critical race theory. People are hearing a lot about that.
This is a big one. Critical race theory.
We spent most of our show on this last week. Critical race theory over critical thinkers. We want our kids not to be taught what to think, but how to think, not the specifics, but think critically. Yes, weigh pros and cons.
And Jeff, I want to say I've done some reporting around the state just recently and in touch with people. There is a growing backlash over this very issue. The critical people are fed up, and we've seen that not just in Illinois, we've seen it across the nation. People are fed up with this, and they don't want their kids being taught that America is a racist nation, that it was founded on racism instead of being founded on freedom. We see this week, we have people in Cuba waving the American flag because they want to be free as well. People around the world look at America as a free nation they want to emulate, and yet we have our schools adopting a program that is teaching our kids that America, no, isn't a land of opportunity, isn't a land of freedom. It's a bunch of racists, and that the Constitution and all the founding fathers derived from racism. And, I think people across the border are really
are we
bucking back
teaching
at
our
that.
kids in schools critical race theory? And, the governor might say no. A lot of the schools are saying no. But if you've raised the question, well, do they say that America suffers from systemic racism? I think a lot of the teachers say that. I don't know, Terry. We've got cops who have to wear body cams, but we don't have teachers have body cams. So how do we really know what our teachers are saying? We get some of it from what our kids tell us if we've got kids in the schools, but other than that, we don't know. And
Let's
I'm not
move on
saying
to
we
some
have
of these other points, and we go on down to number 5, which we kind of already covered, more education spending, over 40% property tax cuts. That's not going to happen, but we laid that out, that the point is Illinois is spending more money on per pupil spending. And then we have, I believe that's what, needless continuation of masks of school kids. In light of the science and data, Jeff, what is the science and data you are referring to here?
PowerPoints again compiled the data, and kids are very much lower risk of getting COVID than many other risks that we readily allow them to incur. I mean, 20 kids, or I don't know, something like that. 10, 15, 20 kids under 20 died from COVID relative to the 25,000 across the state of Illinois. That's not a major risk for kids. And those kids, very few who are at risk, we can mask them, we can accommodate them with remote education. But what you don't want to do is close down the schools for everybody, require kids to wear masks, which the kids
How big of an
complaining-
issue do you think this is going to be for voters across the state?
Gigantic. They're showing up at school board meetings, parents, kids are showing up at school board meetings saying, kids are making the argument I made. 8-year-old kids, 10-year-old kids are saying, look, we haven't been wearing masks in programs we've been doing at summer camps. None of us are getting sick. None of us are dying. Kids are pointing out to their so-called betters, the school board members, that the data don't support don't support at this point
The data
wearing
don't?
masks because the data, the data is plural. Yeah, data do not support. The data do not support wearing masks, Terry. Data is a plural word. Datum is the singular. I think I have that right. So the data do not support that. And why? Because the teachers are now vaccinated. We're in favor of vaccination. Donald Trump came up with these things. We want everybody to get vaccinated. There are some risks, but again, I think they're
As
relatively
time goes
small.
on, let's move on to another one. And the other area that we need to focus on, which I think is a key issue, I think this might be the number one issue: crime, law and order, the enforcement of the laws. We just saw videos out in California. Now that's California, but people see this of looters, people looting a store, and they're just walking out like Santa Claus with a big sack over their shoulder, and no one's even stopping them or attempting to, and just walking out of the store. What's going to happen? These stores are just going to close down in neighborhoods, and then they'll probably accuse the store of closing down for racial reasons, instead of the fact that people are just looting all the goods and not paying for it. But the point is, we have a number of people. We just passed in Illinois a police reform bill. I think it had some good things as well as some bad things. But this issue of defunding the police, we had up in, I'm dropping the name of the park, the Millennial Park in Chicago, last summer, where they were throwing Antifa-esque kind of demonstrations. We have the taking down of, just attacks, the murders and crime is up, the looting along Michigan Avenue, and yet we have some people who want to defund and coddle criminals. We've got Kim Foxx. We've got the whole issue of not no cash bail. And when we see the amount of crime that is going up, not only in Chicago, but in other communities that heretofore had been relatively safe, I think this is going to be a major issue. In an earlier program we talked about, I remember back in the election of Richard Nixon in 1968, and what was the primary issue that year aside from Vietnam? Law and order at the domestic level, because we had the same kind of burning and looting and criminal activity going on in American cities that summer.
Right. And don't take my word for it. Paris Schutz at TTW was interviewing the governor just a day ago, and he was saying, hey, criminal justice reform, you keep touting that, governor, but there are people who say your programs are the policies that we're currently following, that even though many of them are local programs, the state is seemingly agreeing with them. The governor's agreeing with Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Her programs, what do her programs do? Her programs basically focus on releasing more, expunging records, getting people who were harassed for marijuana when they shouldn't new programs so they can get licenses to sell marijuana downtown Chicago, and they're being distributed fairly. And what Paris said, people are saying the issues you've raised, they've raised these issues about prosecution. If the state's attorney does not prosecute violent crime, if bail is given out by the chief circuit court of Cook County judge, Tim Evans, oversees the bail judges, and if they require easy posting of no cash bond, then there are going to be violent people who've been convicted before, who are viewed as dangerous, going right back out on the street. And we've seen the records. They see in 2020, the homicide rate in Chicago went up by 50%, and it's at that sustained level now. So this, again, don't take Terry Martin and Jeff Berkowitz's view for it. Take what TTW is questioning the governor about with Paris Schutz just a day ago. We're taping this on July 22nd. So when the governor announced on July 20th, this was the interview. And Terry, we need competition. We need competition in education. We need competition in ideas and proposals.
And another thing, the other thing I think we need to talk about here and talk about competition. Illinois is in competition with other states. And if all the other states were as messed up as California, we might have a chance, but they're not. And you get other states that are cleaning our clocks. And the point is, you have regulation in Illinois, you have high taxes in Illinois, and you have out-migration. You have people saying, goodbye, good luck, we've had it. And so when we talk about it, as James Carville says, it's the economy, stupid. We might have a number of these issues boiling to the top, where we have lockdowns over an open economy. I mean, why is Illinois so locked down? But again, Florida and Texas were opened up. They did not have the surge of COVID outbreak as we were told they would. We have economic and job growth over stagnation. That's an issue. Might say stagnation over economic job growth. Destroying home equity over increasing home prices. We have, fortunately, some home prices now going up. In fact, today the national average came out that the national average of a home around America is $369,000. I was surprised at how high that is, but that is artificially high because of the economy. Right.
We hope, Terry, that continues. But if you look at the
it
whole
won't.
record
It
over
won't.
The last 5 years,
I'm just wanting to point this out.
Look at the Pritzker record over the last 3 years.
Let me finish the thought here. In case people go, hey, what are you talking about? Home prices are up. They're up for artificial reasons because we had the COVID shutdown. So we are causing out migration. That has been going on for a number of years, over attracting jobs and taxpayers. Right. Number 14, reliable, low-cost energy grid over decarbonization. We don't have. They're saying we got to decarbonize. You and I have talked about this, Jeff. They want high-cost, unreliable, alternative energy instead of relying on the power that we have always had. And as a result, if they pass a Green Deal here in Illinois so that they can wave the flag and say, look how progressive we are, your energy costs are going to be going up, and the cost of business is going to go up. And the last thing that we need in Illinois is for businesses to have one more thing laid upon their back, despite all the regulations, the already increasing costs. Businesses are paying property taxes too, folks, and it's not for nothing that they're trying to move out.
Let's put that up one more, because that was my error. I drafted that, and I should have said the Democratic Party, which is controlling the proposed energy legislation, which is being blocked now and not passing at the moment, but they're the ones who are putting this forward. The Democratic Party is proposing in Illinois decarbonization over reliable, low cost, and a reliable, low cost energy grid. We've talked about that before. We'll come back to that. That's what the candidates need to be discussing. Do they agree with that? Putting decarbonization over reliable, low cost energy grid? Okay. Do they, number 15, we're talking about the governor's touting how wonderful it is that our bond rating went up for the first time after like 18 downgrades in a row. So, but he's securing bondholders over taxpayer relief, because where states like Illinois, Ohio is flush with funds, what are they doing with that? They actually sued the US government, saying you can't stop us from lowering taxes. So they're being flush with funds
Who said
to
that?
lower their taxes. Illinois, the Ohio Attorney General sued the state. They sued the federal government in federal court.
They sued the federal government, not the state. So the Ohio Attorney General sued the federal government because the Ohio was cutting taxes.
Because then they won, and the federal district court judge said that's unconstitutional. The feds cannot prohibit you from exercising your sovereign control over your state spending and taxes. What are we doing in Illinois? We're raising taxes. The governor's touting that. He said, that's great. I raised taxes by $665 million. Isn't that wonderful? No, it's not wonderful. It's really not. He calls it corporate welfare. Many people would say it's just he's going the wrong direction.
Well, the other thing people will remember, and
you got to cut taxes.
We only have about 2 minutes left here, but the point is, people may remember too, the governor was trying to pass a constitutional amendment that would allow him to have a progressive tax, not a constitutional amendment that would allow him to do something about controlling the ever-rising cost of pensions. No. So, these are the issues. The voters will decide as we close out with about a minute and a half left. We threw a whole lot against the wall here. Some of it's going to stick in the minds of the voters. What's sticking in the mind of Jeff Berkowitz? What would you say? If you were running for governor, what would you focus on as a Republican candidate if you were running against J.B. Pritzker?
Well, one thing I'd say is that, folks, I don't know what I'd say if I'm the candidate, but one thing I'd say as an observer, Terry, is that we've talked to 4 announced candidates. One we haven't discussed, but he's announced he's new to the campaign. And guess what, folks? We're making a prediction. I'm making a prediction. As of July 22nd, within the next month, we're going to see some additional serious candidates on the Republican side enter the race. And that's always all to the good. There's nothing saying is wrong with the 4 announced candidates, but competition is good. And if you have more credible, thoughtful candidates who are talking about the ideas we're talking about, you might have 1, you might have 2, might have 3 additional credible candidates, a credible threat to the governor coming into the race in the next month. More on that. Hope we'll be interviewing them on Public Affairs.
How vulnerable do you think Governor Pritzker is?
Well, Terry, we've ticked off 16 issues. We didn't have time to put off the additional 4. We'll keep that as a tease for next week. There are 20 issues that are credible, that are thoughtful.
Yeah, but you're not answering the question.
He is very vulnerable, Terry. He's got $170 million. If Ken Griffin will step up and fund some of these candidates who are credible, and fund some of the state representative and state senator opponents who are, and give some of the incumbents who are Democratic a run for their money, very credible. Will Griffin meet the challenge? Will he meet the challenge of Pritzker spending $150 million to buy the election?
Thanks so much. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next time.